Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Janina, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you. Hello, wine friends, and welcome back to another episode where today we are heading to Spain. But whilst Spain is famous for regions like Rioja, Ribera del Duero, in this episode we are exploring some of Spain's most fascinating and overlooked wine regions. And so, by the end, you will understand why Vino de Pago is one of Spain's most misunderstood wine classifications, but why you absolutely should know about it and should be trying these wines. Why regions like Madrid, Castilla-La Mancha, Extremadura, and Jerez are some of the most exciting places to explore right now, from old vine Garnacha growing at altitude outside Madrid to forgotten varieties like Bobal and Monastrell producing extraordinary wines. My guest today is Sarah Jane Evans, Master of Wine. She is one of the world's leading experts on Spanish wine, a wine writer, journalist. She's also the co-chair of the Decanter World Wine Awards, chair of Spain's Gran Orden de Caballeros del Vino, and the author of several books, including The Wines of Central and Southern Spain, which is what has inspired this conversation today. Now, make sure you stay to the end, because also I have a list of some of Sarah's best value Spanish wines under £20 right now. So pour yourself a glass, get comfortable, and let's explore the incredible diversity of Spanish wine with Sarah Jane Evans. Sarah Jane, I am feeling very, very honoured to have been able to steal some of your time to talk about Spain, in which this is the country that you are dedicated to. So thank you so much for joining me.
It's terrific. It's really, really lovely to be here. To have a chance to talk non-stop about Spain is what could be better.
Here. I hope everyone listening agrees. And actually, okay, you have been traveling across Spain for decades. I don't personally think there are many people that would have the insights to share. So let me ask you, considering all of your travels, what still surprises you every time you go back to Spain as a whole?
There's so much to say about that. What first surprises me is the first time I ever went, which is a student to Spain. It was just wonderful going from being a kind of a woman from the frozen north. I live in London, but it used to feel like the frozen north, and coming to Spain where the sun was shining and people lived on the streets. It was just terrific, and food and wine mattered so much. Now it's so much more. Now that I'm really specializing in wine, then actually what I love each time is there's always something new to discover. Yes, of course, there are the classics. There are things, that great bottle of Rioja that you've always loved, that wonderful, wonderful sherry. But there are new people, new generations. There's so much change happening in Spain, and that you go over with your suitcase empty and your mind open to see what you're going to discover this time.
Amazing. But I mean, is there a wine region that perhaps you thought you understood years ago that completely you've changed your mind about recently?
Because there's so much change. I mean, it's almost hard to keep up with any of them. You can say, for instance, and I'm sure I'll keep coming back to it, but you can say sherry country, Jerez. There we are. We knew about the sherry triangle. We knew about these distinct styles, Fino, Oloroso, Amontillado, all of that. But now we have still wines, unfortified wines coming out of the region. They've made it used to be a triangle, 3 towns. And now production area is made up. It's a sort of, I think you might call it a rhombus, and I'm kind of moving my arms and hands to show you it's a kind of rectangle.
We're just going to have to imagine.
But in a way, Jerez is a microcosm of all the changes that are happening in Spain, and that's just here's this thing that I always hate to read when journalists like myself say, "Oh well, the thing about sherry is it's your grandmother's drink." No, it's not. So much more happening. So I think I would go back to something very obvious and say sherry, especially because the amount of work that they're doing to say to people, actually, there's different ways of drinking it. And you can see it has turned in now into a kind of young metropolitan drink. It may still be your grandmother's drink in the Outer Hebrides. Well, my apologies, the Outer Hebrides, but actually in cities, it's actually, it's beginning to have a real movement because there's a whole new generation discovering it.
See, well, I love that they are. We now need to make that, I guess, a little bit more global. But I fully support this because you are not the only person to mention this. I have had 2 podcasts in, I think, everyone in the last maybe 10, 15 episodes that have come out. One was on lesser known regions of Spain, and literally highlighted was everyone needs to find out what's going on in Andalusia with the still wines. Sherry is not as you know it. And recently, again, I had another podcast with a nomadic winemaker traveling all over the world making wine. And the one region I said, what is the region that we really need to pay attention to? And he brought it to the exact same place. And you've now come along and done exactly the same thing. This could not be highlighted more. Okay.
So
therefore,
the question is, how do you get people to buy it? And, however, I do think I have the answer too, which is now that they have this new denomination coming, it's got to be approved by Europe, but it's on the way, which is called the Vino de Albariza, because Albariza is the white chalky soil, so distinct. And the wines that are going to be in that denomination are the unfortified wines made from the local grape. They are a very good way into sherry because sherry is, it is a bit of a surprise when you first drink it if you're used to drinking Sauvignon Blanc or Agave. But these wines have a very delicate character. They're quite fascinating, and the great thing about them is that they tie up with brilliant tourism. And so you put the two together. Where do you want to go on holiday? You want to go down to Andalusia and then discover those lovely wines, and then gradually you may get more interested. Sommeliers may help you, and you'll end up moving into sherry. But you don't have to start as I did. I started with sherry, but it's not an easy step for anyone.
No, not necessarily. And just like you said, if we're used to our Sauvignon Blancs and our Gavis. So we're talking about the Palomino grape variety here, and like you said, on the famous chalky soils. When do you first of all think that this DO is actually going to be approved? Because this is the first time I'm hearing about it.
Okay, well, it's I've been pressing there's a wonderful president of the regulatory body. It's a terrible word, Consejo Regulador in sherry, Cesar Saldana. He's a really great guy. It's not often you say that about I can't say he's a bureaucrat, but about somebody who has to deal with the European bureaucracy. And he's kept saying to me, no, because I said, look, I've got this book coming out, which was published last June. Mm-hmm. I need, a year ago, I need to be able to put it in the book. And he's like, it's coming. So actually, when I saw him about 2 months ago, he said it is coming in a more profound way. And I think it's just on its way up to Europe. And then it's got to come back down again. So maybe we're talking about a year or so. But what we have had already are some very famous name wineries and then some very unknown young winemakers who are making these wines. And okay, maybe half of them are absolutely terrific and have become super famous. And the other half, maybe not so good. It's like any wine area. But the really famous ones became known as Vinos de Pago. And in Spanish, that means, glugging wine, effectively. But the famous name producers of those have really made Vino de Pago into some kind of super cool category. And it is. So anyway, that's a long way around to say to you, talk to me again in a year.
Soon, maybe.
We should be there.
This is the case of mañana. Oh yes. Dear, Spain, get your act together. So someone's listening now going, okay, fine, you're convincing me. I want to try these wines. This DO doesn't exist yet, which presumably will also have slight regulations on what people do with aging, etc., and I don't know, yields and etc. But right now, how do we find the good stuff?
Well, in one sense, I could say very easily, but maybe that's not exactly true. You need to go to, there's some good importers who are doing it. Look under the word Vino de Pago, but then also look, if you go to a famous name producer like, I could say Barbadillo, or I could say Valdespino. So you go to somebody you've heard of, and you will find very often, if you look on their websites, there's a wine at the bottom, because it still appears at the bottom, and that's the one which says something slightly different, but will certainly not be Fino or Oloroso or Amontillado or any of those classic categories. But they are also, you need to find your local cool independent wine merchant. And now I know they aren't everywhere, but I think the local cool independent wine merchant or the local cool online independent wine writer, who will also quite often have, it's becoming something really important to talk about. So I think that there's a lot of noisy chat if you start searching for Vino de Pago or cool Palomino.
Awesome. Okay, that is a beautiful starting point. Now I'm like, actually, I need to go and start discovering more. And of course, everyone, just like you said, let's just go on holiday. And I'm sure that will be very, very easy down in the south of Spain, getting a load of sunshine, and then you are inundated with amazing wines to try, right?
Although I should just say one thing there, maybe it happens in all the world, but it's something that scandalizes us who go regularly to Spain. That is, if you go on holiday to Jerez and the surrounding region, you're having an Atlantic holiday eating great food, it's very, very, very likely that the red wine you'll be offered is Rioja. And you're like, hang on, I'm miles away. Similarly, if you go to Alicante, you go to a regular restaurant there, they're giving you Rioja. They're like, look, I'm miles away from Rioja. Rioja, you've got wonderful places in you keep to your own zone, and let's just have a chance to drink local wine. So it seems to be, well, it's a problem of, I don't know, technical problem of the strength of distributors and so on. We don't need to go into that, but it is frustrating.
Well, to be honest as well, actually, I'm always frustrated when I go to Spain that if you go to a standard restaurant, they're like, we just have the house wine, and they don't even tell you what it is. And you're like, oh, if you want it by the glass, they have a great list if you are happy to open up a bottle. But if you and your partner just want one glass and carry on your day, you're like, oh, I've got nothing exciting. And that is something I'm like always so frustrated in Spain. So it is probably best that people go and find a wine bar, because that's always, I'm like, I just need to find a wine bar. They will have options by the glass and I will be able to try something exciting. Well, okay, already I love that you've taken us down a path I actually wasn't expecting. You also are now hopefully going to take us down another path, which is Vino de Pago, which is, what do we call Vino de Pago? A classification?
Yeah, I guess it is. It was something when I first came into, well, actually it was after I first came into wine writing, but it started off in about exactly 2003. So here we are. Vino de Pago means a wine from a single vineyard or single estate. Great. So it's, if you happen to have a lovely piece of land, you probably got quite a bit of cash, you've got a lovely house there, and the nicest thing to do is to have a vineyard, and you recognize that your wine is not inside any of the well-known denominations. It happens to be in a wonderful, beautiful mountain place. You're having great joy out of it. But if you try and sell this wine from some unknown place, you're going to get nowhere. So very, very smart winemaker and member of the Spanish aristocracy, the Marqués de Griñón, who had studied at UC Davis, created with a friend who was the first two Vinos de Pago. And his was called Dominio de Valdepusa, still continues. It was a great idea, to have something to say, we have fulfilled the rules. We will be our own regulators. I've been talking about the regulator from Sherry. We will make our own rules. It'll be our estate and it will be called whatever we choose to call it. And they did fulfill all sorts of regulations. Now, what was interesting is that the first ones who joined came from Castilla-La Mancha. And we all know that La Mancha is windmill country, and people never took wines from windmill country very seriously. So he needed to do something, make a real push. So I have to say, all credit to him for saying, we're going to make something special about these wines. Time passes and more come. And the very distinctive thing is that nearly every single one of them is south of Madrid. So the thing is, it's in a place where people basically, didn't know. It wasn't Rioja, it wasn't Ribera del Duero, it was something else. So in one sense, they're exceptionally fine estates. Each one of them has had really, really careful investment. They often have consultant winemakers and so on. What has happened to them since 2003 is that we've all changed suddenly our view about the vines they planted. So typically in 2003, you wanted to have Merlot, Cabernet, all those Chardonnay. You wanted to be as good as your neighbours in France and clearly internationally. And actually, that wasn't. Now we think, no, give us these lovely local rare varieties. But that wasn't the case in that time. So you also find they have actually some quite interesting varieties like Viognier, which is, not something you find much of. So now we're in a really weird position where we have really a number of Vinos de Pago, but nobody really quite knows. Some of them are really excellent and have got great people behind them. So in the UK market, at least, if I'm just talking here about the UK, there are a couple who've got, more than a couple who've got good importers behind them and got some really nice wines. But it's a little bit like, if you go back to the classroom and look at the diagram, the diagram may put Vino de Pago at the top, but actually it's not at the top, it's kind of sideways.
So yeah, you were the one when I came to one of your masterclasses, and this is when it inspired me, like, my God, Vino de Pago is something we should know about, but it's so confusing. And as you said, you look at the quality pyramid and Vino de Pago is at the top. Therefore, it's the best wines, of course. But as you said, that's not true. My understanding of it is that Vino de Pago is about the fact that the estate itself has been recognized of its uniqueness. So it's a philosophy of terroir rather than the region. The region isn't important, but it doesn't actually mean that the wine is better than, say, a top wine from Rioja, a top wine from Priorat, a top wine from Ribera del Duero, right? This is like adding to the confusion.
Completely. So yes, they will have studied the soils. Nowadays, when you can get somebody like Pedro Parra to come over from Chile, he will come and dug holes and have done all of that. They've chosen, now especially the later ones have had very exceptional planting and so on. But if you wouldn't need to say, if you going to a party and wanting to take something special, you wouldn't necessarily take a Vino de Pago. There's so many other confusions. One of the confusions is we were just talking about sherry. Sherry has started at last to talk about the vineyards where the grapes come from. And everybody, Spanish producers, the growers have always known the names of these famous vineyards. And it's been Pago Balbinina, Pago Machanudo, and so on. So you say, oh, so that's a Pago. So why isn't it a Vino de Pago, and why aren't Jerez using that word? And then you would say, well, it's a viñedo, it's a vineyard, but then Rioja has a viñedo singular, but it's not a Pago. And then I should mention this often complicating factor for me. It's been really difficult over the last decade, which is Grandes Pagos. I don't know if you know about all of that confusion.
Of course. So yeah, and so the Grandes Pagos de España, this is more like, I guess, it's like a membership, a private association of top wineries, but it actually, some Vino de Pago estates are in there, but then also there's some of the famous estates within DO. So this is just a membership, an association of good producers, but it's not the same thing as this classification of individual unique site, which is Vino de Pago, right?
Perfect. You can become a master of wine tomorrow.
Yay! I mean, no, I was listening to you when you were doing the masterclass. You explained it well, but it is confusing. I still think though, because surely if somebody does see Vino de Pago, they should be intrigued to try it, right? There is going to be a certain level of quality, surely, to have been able to be classified. And tell me if I'm wrong. And also, actually, what's quite exciting is these are generally out of all of the famous wine regions. So you are tasting wines from Valencia and Navarra and Castilla y León, whereas maybe you wouldn't have even thought to try wines there because you're so comfortable with Rioja.
Absolutely. And I would say, I mean, there's one organization which is actually explains in a way somebody's fairly recently become a Vino de Pago, and that's Abadía Retuerta, which is this wonderful, wonderful monastery with a hotel which gives you a butler, and it's absolutely lovely and has it's very special. Anyway, the fascinating thing about Abadía Retuerta is it's just outside the Ribera del Duero denomination. They're like just over the road. It must have been a source of sheer aggravation to them for years that they would not in Ribera del Duero. So their marketing had to be based on the fact, look, we're wonderful. We're owned by Novartis and we have this loads of money to spend on really, really special wines, and we have this special winemaker. So finally, the answer was to become a Vino de Pago. So if they couldn't get themselves inside Ribera del Duero, maybe they didn't want to be one of many. They could now say, we are the Vino de Pago next door to Ribera del Duero, and congratulations to them because they're doing some great work. But the Grandes Pagos is interesting because they're a great network, which was started by Marqués de Griñón, who started Vinos de Pago. So that is... It is a bit of confusion, but if we set that aside, they swiftly acquired a whole range of family wineries all over Spain. And then I think they had a bit of a kind of unexciting moment. And maybe some of their very early wineries became a little bit, my hand is going, it's like yeah, maybe. And then recently they've had very good people running it, and they've acquired a range of really important family wineries. And so I think now, and they're doing, in a number of countries, they're doing education programs as well. So in the United States and the UK and elsewhere, using their wines, and they're bringing their winemakers. And so Grandes Pagos is on the up again, and maybe is a bit more clear about what it's doing.
Okay, interesting. I mean, okay, my question to you as well, in terms of somebody going, okay, yeah, I'm interested in Vino de Pago. Because these are the unique sites, individual single sites, but they are all over Spain, as you've already said, more from the central part and down. But then they're not going to share a particular style or maybe the philosophy, but the styles are going to be completely different because it's going to be about the grape variety that grows there. The altitude is going to be different. Their own winemaking style, it's completely unique to them, right? You are not going to get any similarities across any of the Vino de Pagos.
Yes.
Simple answer, correct.
But the good thing about that is that you are going to have great fun when you discover them, when you find the one that you like. And there are some styles you like and some you weren't, and some who are still very for my palate, are still very keen to follow the classic Bordeaux blend and quite a lot of barrel aging. But there are others who are doing some quite interesting things, and the generations are changing. So I think there's something really to know about. But just because they call themselves Vinos de Pago doesn't mean you need to like them all. And I think that's the thing about Spain. You know, there is this extraordinary diversity. So though I may be talking just about sherry, I do make sure I go traveling everywhere because there's always something else to discover. You know, don't just stay in one place, for sure.
Of course. Do you think... I guess, do you think that Vino de Pago has been a success?
Well, yes, in a sense. I mean, I could say that every single one of them started as, I think, sweeping statement here, every Vino de Pago that started is still a Vino de Pago. So in that sense, nobody's gone out of business, I think. Somebody will ring in to correct us. Nobody's gone out of business, and they have diversified in different ways. Now, what's interesting is some of them have a regular denomination business in more or less the same area because they happen to be very close to denomination, and at the same time have a Vino de Pago. So somebody who's really made a great push for the future Vino de Pago is somebody I hugely respect, and the bodega is Mostaguillo. And Mostaguillo is in the wine region that couldn't agree what name to have. So they had the two towns. So they called itself Utiel-Requena, which for us is really complicated. It's a bit like Montilla Moriles. They couldn't win the fight, so they just put themselves together. So where on earth is Utiel-Requena? Nobody knew. But what he has very interesting altitude and a very distinctive vineyard. And he's worked over time and with Pedro Parra to do some very, very good things. So he has, on the one side, and what he really worked out, how I first got to him, he has the Vino de Pago. But on the other side, he also has more popular denomination wines. And there's somebody who's and he's one of the people who's developed a local grape variety in that region called Merseguera, which is a white grape variety. That's been a real, in this rise of white grape varieties in Spain, Merseguera has been something like, need to look at this more seriously. It's interesting. It's not just Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc or Biura, which is what we get in so many places across Spain. So it is possible that with a Vino de Pago, you can really unleash some imagination because you're making your own rules and you haven't got the denomination, staring at you and sending inspectors around.
I have to ask you about Merseguera. You've mentioned it now, and I have heard people throwing this around. Not to my knowledge, have I tried a Merseguera? Or did I win your masterclass? Did I?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. So, and most people listening also have not. When, exactly.
So, what are we going to expect from Merseguera as a grape
You
variety?
put me on the spot. Well, we ought to say where Utiel-Requena is, and we're talking about it's inland from Valencia, Alicante. It's in that sort of area, and it's the fascinating thing about Requena. It's where the first. I'll get you to Merseguera in a minute. The first wine university was, so all sorts of important people went there when there was Spain's first wine university, and they had this extraordinary in the town, old amphoras, buried amphoras, enormous clay amphoras, just astounding. And they make amazing sausages, but that's also beside the point. Anyway,
always good to know. No, that's important.
But Merseguera is something that he developed and has brought on, and it has a very nice citrus freshness. We're talking about quite a long way south now, so we think, it's impossible to make fresh white wines in that far south in Spain. Surely, well, they've got altitude there and the right kind of soils. It has a kind of citrus herbal character. It's something that's absolutely lovely by itself, doesn't need to be pushed along by oak or anything like that. It's, what would I say it's next to? Well, I mentioned, I have been thinking about Gavi, which is not a wine I do a lot of tasting notes for, but a number of those Italian wines, like Pecorino, have a kind of herbal character as well. So the thing about Merseguera is it's rather intriguing. And at the moment, it's like, I must think about tasting that. I haven't had too many, but it will continue to grow and develop. More and more people are eventually having it. And that's one thing that's fascinating about Spain, is the rise of white varieties. There's all kinds of interesting ones lurking, which are suddenly coming to the fore. And one of those is Merseguera. You heard it here first.
Well, and absolutely. And I would also say, surely, Albillo Real as well,
Yes.
would you say, as another grape variety?
I hadn't jumped to mention Albariza Real because I haven't quite decided what my opinion
Stance
is. Absolutely. I like to talk about, emphasize the good things in life and kind of most of the time suppress my views. And, so I feel the best thing to do is always communicate the best and not to worry about to hide the rest. So Albillo Real is something I really need to be able to talk or have an opinion on, just to point it out to people as it's becoming something really significant. in a world where, in an area where there's all red wine, especially when people can't sell red wine. So there are these masses of red wine sitting in Spain when we as consumers are actually looking for white. So Albillo Real has also become very significant, as I say, in those red regions. But this, you have to make sure you don't confuse it with Albillo Mayor. And there's another Albillo in Canary Islands where I recently was. So it's also, you need to, if somebody asks you about Albillo, you have to look them firmly in the eyes and say which one, because one can get confused. So I found with all the Albillos, and they are different, that they have a slight richness, how can I say it? Sounds odd to say, fat character. They're quite full and broad in the mouth. And actually, personally, that's not what I'm looking for. But I recognise that that's something that is another traditional local grape, and we need to encourage it apart from the invasion of the just one or two famous white varieties.
Right, good. I think that was a very positive. That was a very positive commentary there. So bringing it back for a second before we then confuse everyone more with all of these other great varieties and things to know about in Spain, we should conclude on Vino de Pago quickly. What frustrates me as well about what is still a really, I think, quite awesome classification is that we don't even have a proper website to just have a full list. There is a Vino de Pago website. I looked on it before coming online, but it only lists 12. And as far as I know, there's 20 odd.
Yes. And I say, they're odd, yes, because they're still going up. So this is extraordinary, because I nearly, actually, before we began to talk, I thought, I'll go to, it's quite complicated to get to it, but Spain, Wines from Spain, has a website, and it has this very complex map of denominations and subdenominations, the IGPs, which aren't quite yet denominations. And no, they don't have, and they have no joint marketing because they're not part of a joint body. I imagine that if they were going to do some lobbying for Europe, one or other of them would get together and they'd do something. But no, it's quite extraordinary. So here are we with really big interest about these wines and where they're going. And I mean, they are, as independent wine people, they're a force for something or other, but not yet. Anyway, yes, we heard it here.
Sorry to interrupt the podcast for a moment, but before we continue our conversation, I want to say a huge thank you to today's episode sponsor, Pago Finca Élez. I want you to remember this name because they are part of Spain's wine history. They were one of the first 2 Vino de Pago estates recognised in Spain. So back in 2002, alongside Marqués de Griñón, they received this prestigious protected designation of origin, or PDO. Now, I first personally met Finca Élez earlier this year at Taste Spain London. And if any of you are following me on Instagram, you will know I was posting all about these wines. They were one of my favourite producers of the day. They have this 38 hectares of vineyards. They're sat at about 1,000 metres above sea level in the Sierra de Alcaraz Mountains. So think dramatic landscapes, huge temperature swings between day and night. There's limestone-rich soils, and all this is exactly the kind of conditions that allow grapes to develop incredible concentration, which they had, and then keeping this freshness and elegance. Honestly, these wines are beautiful. So if you're planning a trip to Spain, these guys are in Castilla-La Mancha. You could base yourself in Tomelloso, which is about 45 minutes away from the winery, or stay closer in El Bonillo, and you can combine wine with incredible landscapes, including the nearby Lagunas de Ruidera, one of Spain's most beautiful natural parks. Now, if you want to get your hands on the wines now, check out the show notes for availability where you are. If you are in the UK, whoop whoop, we have them in Fareham Wine Cellar, including one of my personal favourites, the Pago Finca Élez Sensibel. Made from 100% Sensibel, also known as Tempranillo. This is limited release, single vineyard wine, and this shows exactly what high altitude Spanish vineyards can achieve. So,
Remember the name, Pago Finca Élez. And now, let's get back to our conversation about Vino de Pago. So we'll see how they get on, maybe as this not just a classification, eventually maybe at some point they make a proper association so they can promote themselves better. But right now, do you have any advice on discovering for somebody who's like, cool, this does sound great, I really do want to know where these are? I know that almost half actually are in Castilla-La Mancha. But yeah, how would one discover how if a winery is a Vino de Pago?
I'm going to say something really self-promoting here, which isn't the point. It is very hard to do that. But one of the ways you can do it, at least, is I do in my book on Centuries Under Spain, I do list all of those Vino de Pago, and you can go and search on their websites. And for the ones that are on members of Grandes Pagos as well, which is about, I think, 6 of them. There's also more material there. And then you can put it together. It's not easy. Spain's a big country. And I vividly remember doing a trip with the family organization, Grandes Pagos, to some of their members. One or two of them were also Vinos de Pago. And sitting in the back of a very small car, driving for an exceptionally long time across central Spain. So you need to say, okay, well, let's say I'm having a holiday in Madrid, or I'm having a holiday, I want to go to Toledo to see the great El Greco there. Maybe then I should work out where the Montes de Toledo are, and then there are a couple there. What is interesting, and talk about them in a slightly historical way, is, there are still people putting themselves together to get the license. So it's a living body, but golly, yes, it would be great if you could they could get a sketch map together on their websites, and then it would be, I think, a very helpful thing, because some of them are fascinating people. They're all fascinating people.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yes.
Everyone has something unique to contribute. No, but thank you for mentioning that this is in your book. You have done all the work for us, so you should be letting everyone know that actually you put together a list. So this, for everybody, I will put a link in the show notes. This is the wines of central and southern Spain. You obviously, before, you've done the northern Spain. So tell me a little bit about why how long did it take you to get the material and complete this second book on, because it covers quite a few wine regions, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. When I wrote the first book, which was published just before COVID, it was basically, I thought, okay, well, that's going to be, Rías Baixas. It's going to be Albariño country. It's going to be Rioja, Ribera del Duero, and a bit more. And that turned out to be quite a large book. Anyway, that was fine. And then I had a bit of a problem, because I thought, well, I finished the book and there's no room to put Catalonia in there. I can't get Prioratin or any of that. There just isn't space. So I thought, fine, I won't do that. We need to get this book published. And then suddenly I come to this book and I'm like, the book is called, we'd have pre-agreed with the publisher, Central and Southern Spain, but it does also contain Catalonia. Anyway, so we, as I say, the book was published in 2018, and then we had COVID. And the point about these books is you have to travel. You can't sit there, reading reference material. It's the personal connection that really counts. So then that took quite a lot more. I'd known I was going to do it. It took quite a lot more traveling and visits and meeting people in all sorts of places. And one of the things I found compared to the wines of northern Spain is actually a lovely reviewer, and Tamlin on Chances Robinson pointed it out again. She'd noticed what I said the other day, which is that as you get to know the growers, the producers, and you see them a lot, you taste with them, and then you get you're walking across rainstorms or across muddy paths, or they're kind of dragging you down a hillside because you're afraid you're going to fall over. They become friends. So that every single one of those I know by their first names, and that's quite a special feeling. There's only one producer who I wouldn't call by their first name out of respect, and that's Miguel Torres Sr. And he is, because everybody calls him that, Mr. Torres. And so Mr. Torres is Mr. Torres in the book, but everybody else has a first name. And there is a warmth about this network of, the excitement of what's happening at Spain at the moment. You had to think that after the Second World War, which wasn't quite so significant in Spain because they had already had the Civil War. So the whole of Spain was basically managed under a dictatorship, and that included agriculture. So it meant that things were planted in the wrong places, that the priorities just weren't right. And it wasn't till Franco's death and then till their entry into Europe that things changed. At that point, winemakers were traveling, they were going to New Zealand, Australia to make wine, all that. So it had a very late explosion, and Spain has been quite slow to catch up on that. Now we're several generations down the line, but that's partly that energy that you get now is something really special. And now you find Argentinian winemakers are coming over to make wine in Spain because they know it's the place to be. So why did I take so long to do it? Because having started, you see, because I'm also a person who takes time to, having started the thought, then I was like, now I have to fill in all the gaps and put together all that I know. And because it also included the Canary Islands and the Balearic Islands, there was a lot. But it was such a lovely, lovely process. But that's why I wanted to do it. Now, I should say that maybe the original thing is it's published in the Classic Wine Library series, of which I'm a series editor. In other countries, we've been able to have the Book of Germany or the Book of South Africa, but you can't have a Book of Spain because it's just too big. And it's the same way with Italy. You can't have one. Well, you can do a book for Italy, but if you want the kind of detail to encourage people to go, I mean, my book even contains Instagram links for the best people for you to follow on Instagram. I want people to get inside. Part of it is obviously, it has a serious basis, but part of it is, come on, let's be excited about what's happening in Spain and take it seriously. Because I think people don't necessarily take Spain that seriously, and especially southern Spain. I mean, that central bit is like, you came to a party on a Friday evening, bringing one of those bottles. People might think you were being a cheapskate. And the answer is, no, you're not.
You're being intelligent. You must have read Sarah Jane's book and you know where it's at, right? So, okay, you talk about the energy and yes, regions that people don't know about and they should. We've already touched on Jerez, and you got people excited right at the beginning. We talked about Vino de Pago, which again, it's like, whoa, what is this classification and what's going on? So how do we finish this podcast? What region? You can choose one. Do we talk about, look, it's what Madrid, okay, no, I'm going to give you a few. Do we talk about Madrid? Because this is something where people don't realize how close vineyards are to Madrid. Or what about something like Extremadura, which obviously most people know it for jamón ibérico de Bellota, but there's some really cool wines coming out. Choose me, or something else. You're free to go somewhere else.
Certainly, since I started thinking about actually my first trip to Vinos to Madrid was for a company called Berta Beleva, who has a great winemaker who's moved on now. But Madrid has, the thing it has now is Garnacha. Everybody is talking about, and Spain is saying, we are the kings of Garnacha. Now, there are very many different styles, but if you want to find something special in Garnacha, just do a little day trip around Madrid. If you want to go to the very best Roman remains in Spain, you go to Merida, which is in Extremadura, just very hot, just near the Portuguese border. And around there, between Merida and then south to Seville, if you're going to Seville, go north. Don't just go south, go north. Go into this completely forgotten land, which has got some amazing cheese. And it also has a few, I wouldn't go super enthusiastic, but each one of them very individual and interesting wineries. So, that's a place to look at. But I started earlier with Valencia. And I must say, thinking about Utiel-Requena, I did a marvelous trip years ago to Valencia, and I thought, hey, I'm going to be, this is oranges, isn't it? We gave Valencia oranges. Valencia, if you go down the coast away, Valencia itself is marvelous, and it's not just paella. It is obviously paella on oranges, but there's so much more. But when you go further down, you find these terrific historic places which have been making wine in amphoras, and they use it in local varieties. And there's a wonderful producer. He now has his wine in Fort Mason, I'm impressed to say. They have a very jazzy label, a Rafa Canberra, and he's got a really, really lovely wine. But there's a whole cluster of very cool people down there, which then takes you down to Alicante. And Alicante, too, is so much more. So actually, break out for your holidays. If those are all great holiday zones, but actually give yourself some more time to go and make those visits, because you'll be so rewarded and the people are so welcoming.
So if you're talking about Utiel-Requena, you're talking about Alicante, are we talking about the Bobal grape variety here? Is this the grape variety that people should be investigating? Certainly. Because when I first remember Bobal, it was that kind of, it's an extraordinary variety which can grow in very extreme conditions, high up, bush vines. It could cope with the extreme weather. And it was used to make a kind of, and still does make, what at the time was a rather bubblegummy rosé. And now the rosés have improved. But what's been super interesting is that around the area and up to Manchuela, you have now absolutely top class red Bobal, which is something really exceptional. That's where I say each time you go back to Spain, you find something else very exciting. And Bobal somehow it has a rather uncool name. It doesn't sound serious, but actually the producers making it are doing some exceptional things, and you're getting wines which have lovely fruit, excellent texture. We never used to talk about texture, but we do now, and freshness, and very, very individual. So really glad you asked me about Bobal, because it's really something special. Well, from what I know about Bobal as well, there is some real research happening with the grape variety, looking at clones and looking towards the future in terms of climate, because they're saying as well, this grape variety, it's so drought resistant. They're looking to see now which versions, which clones are, I don't know, the strongest for our future. But it seems like not only is it producing some really good fruit, and that's also because there's, as you've already mentioned, older vines. There's a huge percentage of these older vines in Utiel-Requena, but it seems like it could be a grape that we can really, focus on if, climate, not if, as climate chaos continues and it's more and more scorching in terms of temperatures down in Spain. So have you heard any more of the research at the moment in terms of their developments, or is that again, mañana, they'll let us know?
No, there's a huge amount being done. It's good to hear from you about the Bobal, which is not one I've heard of, but they are, with this focus on old vines, people, I remember going to an event in Jumilla with a very well-known Spanish journalist. We were giving classes to the UK press about old vines. And in fact, Jumilla is doing a wonderful, impossible place to pronounce, Jumilla, but it's doing a wonderful campaign on its old vines. In fact, relatively, it doesn't have that many, but it has a very active and informed regulatory body and the woman in charge there is really doing very good campaigns. But the Spanish journalist with me said, why is it that you English are running this old vine movement? We're Spaniards, we're the ones who should be having respect for our wines and celebrating them, because if you want old vines in Europe, Spain is the place to go. It has, through its political history and for all sorts of other reasons, it has this extraordinary patrimony of old vines. And now, if you talk to some producers, they'll say, oh, you're being sentimental. What we need is fruit. But actually, there is something you can get, and particularly in some regions, from these wonderful old vines, which are vines that were planted before phylloxera happened. So they are a piece of history.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you raised that, because the whole extraordinary patrimony of Spain is something else that's encapsulated in a wine glass.
Some of the best wines I've had from Spain have been Franco, isn't it? And that, means that it's on its own original rootstock. And just, you said texture. It's not just concentration, but there is a mouthfeel, a texture. And I hate using the word minerality, whatever that means. But it really isn't just about fruit and spices and herbs. There's something a little more savory, more ferrous, more earthy in some way, or salty, that really comes through in these old vines. And yes, I 100% agree. I've done an episode on Jumilla just because these old vines, Monastrell, the grape variety, the main grape variety for me, doesn't get the recognition it deserves, which again, I think we've mentioned all these, there's so many grapes in Spain. It's not just all about Tempranillo and
exactly
Garnacha, although Garnacha, again, I'm actually so excited about Garnacha at the moment, and it deserves all the attention it gets. Of all the regions we've talked about today, or haven't, I mean, there's so many more that are in your book. Manchuela, as an example, that flies under the radar. So, of all the regions that exist, which everyone can read about in your book, what do you think is the most likely to gain international recognition over the next decade? What's your prediction? Say it here first. Let's
see. Best place to say it. So I would have said Tenerife in the Canary Islands, but you might say, well, it's got there already. But the interesting was there's been one producer, Suetes del Marqués, who certainly are up there on everybody's radar. But what's interesting now is that is now, I was just at an island conference very recently. There are other producers really coming up doing their own thing. So it's not just a matter of one leader. And Jonathan has started making wines with a very famous footballer, David Silva, in Gran Canaria, and David's wines in Gran Canaria are terrific. But I particularly like wines with a lot of crunchy freshness, and they have crunchy freshness. So there's much more to the islands than you could possibly guess. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, although they have had phylloxera just appear in some abandoned vineyards in Tenerife, but they seemed relatively cool about it. I was in panic mode, but they were quite like, no, we can control it. We know what to do. So I hope that's the case. So I think that's where I would put my money. But on the other hand, well, it's hard, isn't it? But that is hedging my bets.
Your bets there, Sarah Jane. You're like, let me throw in another region. No, go on. Give us another one.
I mean, I think that the other place, which is in the book but might not appear like central and southern Spain, is in Catalonia. There is such a diversity of excitement, and you get a great variety like Xarel·lo, the one that's great to use in Trivial Pursuit because it begins with an X and has a kind of full stop in the middle. People are moving on to a next stage of delicacy, and there's things like Garnacha Blanca. We would never have liked Garnacha Blanca before because it's not fruity. It's a much more complicated wine, but properly made and explained by a sommelier is something really lovely and very different. And Spain has, I think, 75% of all the Garnacha Blanca in the world. I mean, it's just so. I think some good holiday plans in Catalonia would be a very good thing, because individual denominations, terroir to Empordà, are coming out with some very, very special wines.
And actually, do you think that you can get some pretty good value there? Because again, they're close to Priorat. I mean, it's different. It's completely different, but they haven't got the fame. I've always Terralta. Sometimes I get quite surprised. Do you think that's the best value for money in Catalonia?
Well, it's some of the best.
Where would you?
Absolutely. I mean, the hateful thing about Spain, and I've done it in my time when I was working at BBC Good Food, and you wanted to have a recipe for Christmas punch. There was always a punch at Christmas, and the tip always was go and buy yourself a cheap and cheerful juicy red from Spain because it'll be the cheapest one there is for the quality. You're like, no, Spain is more than that. But certainly, the good thing about Priorat was, the producers there who got Spain to be willing to charge more for its wines. I mean, as consumers, we might hate it, but they have. It's a country which doesn't necessarily have quite, in a sweeping statement coming alert, hasn't had enough confidence in itself, and now it has. It's making great wines, but it hasn't been quite so good as other countries, and so putting its hands on hips and saying, these are great wines and I'm going to charge you for them. So in the meantime, you can get exceptional value for money.
Okay. So basically, you're not going to give us one region.
Well, this is, it's really
no pressure.
Difficult. No, it is really difficult. They're exceptional. Exactly. I've mentioned down the Mediterranean coast. So something else which is fascinating is Malaga. Now, Malaga has been famous for sweet wine. So it makes really great sweet wine. But it has also, the funny thing about Malaga is there's a great variety, Pedro Jimenez, which makes these treacly, syrupy wines which you get in Jerez from sun-dried grapes. But up in the mountains, 1,000 meters above Malaga, you can get the purest, most delicate, wonderful white wine you can imagine. It's pure and very refined. It's Victoria Ordóñez is the producer who does it. But there's a secret hidden depth in Malaga, which I think our focus has been far too much on just tourism. And obviously they have great Holy Week processions and everything. And, Malaga is amazing like that. But so I'd say maybe Malaga, this is your moment.
Interesting. Wow, okay. I'm sold. Everybody, let's go to Malaga. Okay, as we finish off, let's get, just a little bit of, let's get a bit romantic.
Oh.
Let's take ourselves mentally and spiritually to Spain right now. What region for you, this is just for you, not for anyone else, gives you the strongest sense of place? And that's maybe not just through the wine, but it could be with the food, the villages, the landscape. What is that? What fills your soul when you're there? What excites you?
It's Andalusia, but it's especially Jerez. I have a history there which goes back really, really a long time. And there's this lovely mixture. There's still some people whose most of them are retired now, but who I met first, whose nannies and grandparents, and indeed maybe their grandparents were English. And so there was that very English thread. And, Jerez and England go back an exceptionally long way. There is the joy of, it does rain in Jerez quite a lot, but generally there's a joy of being out on the streets, going from bar to bar, having some tapas here and tapas there. It's so contrasting with my London life, and it's terrific. Now, there's also now another movement of young winemakers. As I say, that goes back to our excitement about Vinos Albariza. There's one or two really exceptional wine bars, which are having all kinds of interesting wines. You can drink yourself to heaven in the evening. So I think, it's full of buzz because there are all these new winemakers coming in, or the next generation coming in, doing something really exciting. So I need to be there to find out what's happening. I think,
okay,
yeah, that's the place.
I love it. Wine region to visit, Jerez, done. Okay, quick fire. What's one Spanish wine under £20? So that'll be like $30 that everyone should try. What comes to your head first?
What comes to my head first? Oh, one thing I would say under £20 is don't buy the Spanish wine, buy the sherry vinegar. Because the thing you need, maybe this relates back, the thing you need to give yourself the flavour of Spain, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, even if it's only, a typical English salad, you need sherry vinegar, or on strawberries, you need that little. So for me, that's, you can get that for under £20. But otherwise, I think I might say, because actually, prices have actually gone up rather a lot, because I would, I think I'll say sherry vinegar. Yeah.
Easier. Everyone just go on your exploration. Do you know what, Sarah Jane, thank you. I could ask you so many different questions, but you've actually really touched on just the excitement, the energy. There are so many different great varieties people can be trying. I mean, everyone just go travel to these regions because, yeah, the food scene, younger people working with old vines, more modern techniques, it's exciting. And even I knew a lot of this. Some of this was new on this podcast, but even I'm like, oh, I want to drink more Spanish wine.
Yeah, well, let's do it.
Let's do it together. Everybody, let's all do this together and drink more wine. So, Sarah Jane, thank you for just talking a little bit from your experience and your feeling about the beautiful wines of Spain. So thank you for coming on.
Hasta la vista.
Hasta la vista, baby. Now, as soon as we stopped recording, I got the loveliest email from Sarah Jane saying, bless her, that she felt that she had shortchanged us all by not mentioning wines under £20. And so here is her list with her descriptions so you can really feel exactly why she's recommending those wines. And for those of you not in the UK, pay attention to the grape varieties and go and search for your nearest equivalent. So, wine number 1 from Marks and Spencer's, found Balearic Island Red 2022 for just £12. So this is a blend of the classic Balearic grapes, Cayet and Manto Negro, with a dash of Cabernet Sauvignon and a small oak influence. And this is a great chance to taste varieties that don't often escape the islands and the Spanish mainland. And apparently, you may not have made it to a Mallorcan beach this summer, but this will give you the memories. Now, wine number 2, Waitrose, number 1, Castillo Perelada Cava Brut 2021. This is £12.50 and a real stalwart of the number 1 range that Waitrose does. It's consistently good, dry, crunchy cava from a super reliable producer, worth buying by the box when Waitrose has its multi-buy offers. Yes, I completely agree with that. Wine number 3, the Wine Society has a Rafa Cambra Monastrell Garnacha from Valencia 2025, and this is just £9.95. And if you don't already belong to the Wine Society, you have instructions from Sarah Jane to sign up now. It is well worth the one-off joining fee. Their Spanish list is really bursting with energy and packed with value wines and new wines. Take this juicy, honest red from an excellent producer who deserves to be better known. Now, wine number 4 that she recommended is Morrison's The Best Block Series 018 Albariño 2024 from Valdesalnes in Rías Baixas. And this is £18 a bottle. The shelves seem awash with Albariños, but it's worth stopping at this one. Ripe stone fruit contrasting with the classic saline freshness and just a hint of lime pith. Sarah Jane's 5th wine is Sainsbury's Taste the Difference Fino Reserva Sherry from Jerez. This is £10.50, but apparently currently on offer at £6.50. Let's see how long that lasts. Wow, okay. Sainsbury's sherries are consistently good, and this handy bottle is a must for the fridge. Do not forget to lay in Marcona, almonds, and top quality olives. Okay, Sarah Jane, we will. And last but not least, Majestic are doing the, totally agree, Bodega Cerrón Remordimiento 2023 from Jumilla. This is £16, or more importantly, if you buy a mix 6, just £12. I was talking all about these wines at the moment. They're in there. As she says, snap this special buy up whilst it lasts. It's a Chardonnay, not usually my first choice from Jumilla, but the 4th generation brothers are doing something exceptional with their organically and biodynamically farmed old vines. Discover what they are all about before demand for their wines pushes the prices out of reach. I 100% agree with that. Now, as always, in the show notes, you're going to find links to the wines and wineries mentioned on today's episode. And if today's conversation has inspired you to dive deeper into Spanish wine, I hope it has. Sarah Jane's brilliant new book, The Wines of Central and Southern Spain, is available from Academy de Vin Library. If you go to their website, you can use my code. You're welcome. Eat Sleep 15 for 15% off. And as always, any questions, thoughts, comments about today's episode, get in touch with me. My email address is also in the show notes. Now,
Dun, dun, dun. This episode marks the end of this season. Season 6 is done, and I'm going to take a little summer break. Thank you so much for joining me throughout the season. Whether you've listened to one episode or every single one, I genuinely appreciate you being part of this wonderful wine-loving community. I will be back in September with plenty more fascinating guests, stories, regions, and of course, wines to discover together. But before I leave you, here is a wine quote to finish the episode and season. And so Ernest Hemingway famously said, "Wine and friends are a great blend." So my wish for you this coming month is simple. Stay curious, keep exploring, and never underestimate the power of opening a bottle with good people around you. And if they're enjoying wine, do let them know about this podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, please do leave a review, leave a rating. It all helps the podcast grow and allows me to keep coming back with more conversations. Here is to discovering new wines, new places, and new stories. Until next time, wine friends. Cheers to you.